So hello everyone once again, and welcome back to the Online TestConf, the Spring Conference of the Online TestConf. We're going to get started with our next session, and our next presenter is a gentleman called Eran Kinsbruner. Eran, by the way, are you with us?
Yes, Joel. Yes.
Wait a second. Just 1 second, please. We're having here some, wait, there we go. Sorry. I will explain that in a couple of minutes, but yes, this technology issues that we're having because we're actually starting to stream also on YouTube a little bit later on. In any case, so Eran Kinsbruner, we can actually see your screen, so thanks for that. Eran, he is the mobile evangelist at a very cool company called Perfecto, and I'm sure that Eran will actually talk about that in a couple of seconds. He has been in testing for almost 20 years, and I really like the companies that he's worked with. And again, he's worked with some pretty incredible names like Sun, GE, Newstar, and a lot more additional companies. Now, in the later years, he has been recognized as an influencer and a thought leader. He has been a couple of times on Joe Colantonio's Test Stack podcast. The last time that he was there was actually talk about his pretty cool book, and I know it because I read it, called the Digital Quality Handbook. So Eran, we're waiting for a great session, and I'm gonna leave you with him. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joel, and welcome everyone. For me, it's a privilege to be in this cool online conference. Actually, my topic is a great continuation to the previous session by Felicity. She was talking about test coverage. I'm going to take it a step further and talk about test coverage. But you have the tests, you develop them. Now what? How you're going to define the right testing lab for your application, for your native application, hybrid application, and so forth. Before I dive in, as Yoel introduced me, actually you did all the work for me. I'm again a mobile evangelist at Perfecto, blogger, speaker. Quite recently became an author. That's the new book that I jointly developed with other thought leaders. By the way, it's not just myself. It's in collaboration with companies such as Microsoft, CA, Applitools, Blazemeter, Test Fairy, and some other thought leaders in the industry. So if you are doing today mobile or web testing, I think that you'll find very good practices and guidelines in this book with a lot of code samples, how-tos, pitfalls, and many more. It's available on Amazon. Feel free to look it up. It's not that expensive, and I think that you'll get some ROI on that. In today's session, I'm going to actually talk about some methodologies, proven methodologies for mobile test coverage. I'll talk about how to implement this methodology as part of your mobile application strategy. If time permits, I also want to drill down into web testing. I know that my session is about mobile, but you are accessing from the mobile device also websites and everything. So having the right web testing coverage is also relevant in this conversation. I will be happy to address questions as time permits, either in this session or outside of the session on the Slack channel. To talk about digital test coverage, I developed together with this index of Factors magazine, which I will introduce in a second, a full set of assets that can be found in this link, and I will share the slide with all of you after the session. So you actually have a few tools and guides to use if you're now looking or challenged with the right mobile test coverage. And this is the URL. You can download. Everything here is free. You can download and read and educate yourself on top of my current session. So let's get serious and let's start to understand what is this test coverage conversation. Why is this so challenging? Today, most of the time, traffic comes from mobile devices, smartphone, tablets, or the remaining of that comes from desktop browsers. Due to the fact that every month, almost every month, you'll see a new operating system, either it's a beta, and today betas are public releases. You know, if I have a developer account or not, I can install a public iOS beta on my device. Just last week, after Apple Worldwide Developer Conference, Apple released a developer preview of iOS 11. iOS 11 now can be installed on your iPhone 6s or iPhone 7. It's on your own risk, but it's available. Same goes with Android. Android O is on developer preview, Android 8. New smartphones are going out almost every month. Chrome browsers also every month. Firefox also every month. So this cadence of releases drives organization crazy because from one end, they cannot maintain an ongoing lab that refreshes every month these entire platforms. And honestly, they sometimes don't even know that either they are being released or what is actually being used by the market, so they can limit their test scope just to the most relevant relevant platforms. And you know that there are more than 35,000 or even more distinct Android smartphones in the market today. So figuring out on which devices to test is a big challenge. And maybe this guy over here feels sometimes, okay, I finished my testing on version 1 of my app, but you know, this bucket continues to get full, and actually is being challenged by keeping up with all the changes, and quality and coverage goes together and are also relevant in a moment in time. So let's assume you released in June your first version of your mobile app, or a second version, doesn't matter. I can assure you that in July, you know, it might not be that relevant, you know, whatever you tested, just because even if you didn't change a line of code in your application, just because you're now going to see an iOS 10.3.3 out there, you will see a new Chrome version out there, you will see a new iOS version out there, or a new device. So it's a constant struggle, it's a constant job or role of both the QA and the developers. It's not just a QA. The fact that it's written here, test coverage, it doesn't mean that it's just the problem of the QA engineers or the test automation engineer. It's part of the entire R&D, because the R&D is in charge of the functionality of the features, and every new version that comes up also introduces new features, new functionalities, so the developers also need to keep up with what's going on in the market. So it's an organizational responsibility. And everything that changes every month is very challenging, but at least from a mobile perspective, my recommendation, going to the fourth question here, is at least once a quarter, that's the minimum, to go and validate your existing test lab for your mobile or web, and make sure that, you know, it still at least runs on the latest and greatest operating system version. If you see that there is a very old legacy device, maybe consider refreshing it, updating it with a newer version or a new device. And the bottom line is, you need to have someone, doesn't matter who, someone in your R&D, in your testing team or your development team, business, that is taking, you know, responsibility as in it, and is in charge of test coverage as a, you know, as a daily job, if you like. Let me explain, you know, why test coverage is not just about devices and operating systems, okay? Because we'll soon drill down and I will explain to you, you know, which smartphones, which tablets, how to define this test lab. But at the end of the day, you're not just testing a Samsung S6 with Android 7, you're actually testing the full user experience of your target users. So you develop the mobile application. Right now, you know, you see on my left hand here, you know, I'm logged into a grocery network chain in the US called Cub. You know, what you see here, you see on my notification bar, plenty of things going on, right? You see that I'm not on Wi-Fi, I'm actually running on a 4G network. I'm on AT&T, by the way. I didn't have a full battery at that time. I'm 85% charged. I have plenty of background notifications, okay? news applications, emails, social media. Okay, and I can go on and add more notification, because that's how life looks like for a typical mobile end users. Look at yourselves right now. You are in a meeting. Hopefully, you're looking at the screen and listening to what I'm saying. But in the background, things are happening on your device. So when people ask me, okay, what is test coverage? I'm saying, okay, mimic your typical end user, your profile. Make sure that you have the enough sufficient background noise, if you like, which takes into account few of the things which I've mentioned, because that's the typical, I would say, setup of any mobile test plan for your app. Only then, when you reach this kind of setup for your mobile device, only then start testing your own application. Okay, your application is only one out of many things that happen on the device at any given point. And oh, by the way, I'm right now showing you that this device was taken on a 4G network, but even a 4G network varies when you're looking at different carriers. And you can see here from an open signal research, and they're doing many researches on an ongoing basis across different geographies. You can see that from a download speed perspective, Sprint is the slowest out of all the 4 top US carriers. Verizon and T-Mobile are more like the same. AT&T is a bit lagging behind. So from a testing lab perspective or test coverage perspective, I would actually take some of the edges here. I'll take Sprint, which is kind of the worst here, and I will take Verizon, which is the greatest, and maybe this will be the benchmark for my network performance testing or network environment setup, if you like. So that's, I would say, this is the background for any test coverage scenarios that I would recommend you to do. That's a day in the life, if you like. I took it even one step further. Okay, I took my own Bank of America application. I'm a Bank of America application, and if I'm the QA engineer, the test manager for Bank of America, these are the things which I'm challenged by from a test coverage perspective, right? I am enabling my users to do check deposit. While I'm in the app, I'm logged in, an incoming call may come up. So I need to have the ability from a testing perspective to handle system pop-ups. It's also part of my test coverage, right? I need to be able to mimic fingerprint, right, from a sign-in perspective. And I need to also manage location services, in conjunction with other location services such as Google Maps, Waze, or other applications. So all of these environmental things are part of the test coverage conversation. And unfortunately, if you look today at the test framework landscape for mobile, you'll see that you have Selenium, you have Appium, you have Espresso, Exitest UI, you have some Cucumber-based test frameworks. None of them today are strong enough to give you the right coverage, that mimics image injection, voice injection, GPS injection, Touch ID, system level, full system level control that is able, while testing your application, to also dismiss a call or dismiss a message or a pop-up. All of these things consist of your entire mobile test plan, and there is a gap today in the open source frameworks that can complement or support this kind of scenarios. That's just, when people ask me, okay, what is, an appropriate user experience or test coverage for a mobile app perspective, I'm usually saying, okay, look at this guy, okay, that's your test coverage, that's your environment. I showed you in the previous 2 slides, but this guy, again, running on a 3G or a 4G on a specific operating systems, maybe he's using a device on a landscape or a portrait mode. He has different background apps running on his device, and he might be on a move, so location services might be running in the background because he's like subscribed to get notification from his Starbucks or other chains of apps that he's using. And all of these things consume battery, and all of these battery things impact the overall performance. So that's, again, your setup before even answering the question which devices, which operating systems, because the devices and operating systems also vary between all of these user conditions. For that purpose, hopefully I didn't scare you too much. I spent almost 2 years investigating the market. I'm doing it for many years, but I was able to develop something like a factors magazine, an index that simply guides test automation engineers, developers, marketing folks, everyone who is involved in a mobile application development, together with some partners in the market such as IHS Market, which is in the UK, also has branches in the US. I work with Comscore and StatCounter and App Annie and some other large research vendors to simply build the one, I think, and only today in the market guide for test coverage. This guide provides on a quarterly basis a 14 countries index that tells you what is, from a testing perspective, the most recommended devices, operating systems, and of course, screen parameters for your mobile app. I'm also leveraging not just these research firms. I'm also learning a lot from the market itself. I'm attending a lot of events like Worldwide Development Conference and the Google I/O. I'm looking at a lot of data coming from the Perfecto cloud. Perfecto is a vendor that offers quality services in the cloud for both mobile, web, and IoT. So we are seeing great traffic coming from our customers on multiple devices, and it also provides me back insights that I can plug into this report. For those of you online who haven't seen this report, the report is quite simple to read. It simply guides, or shows you on the left column which devices are, the top used in the US or other geographies. As I mentioned, we have 14 geographies supported in this report. I'm also providing the trend, compared to the previous quarter. Is this device more used than before, or the usage is dropping, or remains untouched? Also, I'm marking devices like the Nexus or the Pixel as reference devices, just because even though they might not be highly used, the Nexus and the Pixel devices are the reference devices for Android operating system, making them the first in the market to get Android O, Android 7.1.2, and so forth. In addition, I'm also providing the screen insights and screen parameters from a coverage perspective. Even if you're not just developing a responsive web, even if it's a native web app, making sure that all your visuals and the images and everything looks fine across all the different devices and operating systems, whether they're in landscape or portrait, makes a lot of sense. And also, the different devices and operating systems also have different PPIs, pixel per inch. And why PPI is important from a coverage perspective? The pixel per inch, or the density, the higher it is, obviously the end user will experience a better or a higher quality image or graphic on his smartphone. However, from a device and processing perspective, hardware perspective, to reach this high density, the device needs to work harder, right? In order to compute and make sure that the refresh rate and everything looks fine on that target device. So from a performance perspective, there is a trade-off here. So the right mix of devices, operating systems, screen size, resolution, and PPI, gives you like a very good sense of, your end users, your target market, and at least from my perspective, that's a very good mix to have. On the right hand, as I mentioned, I'm providing the recommended operating system and also the aging, the release date of the device. And I think that, I think that from a release date perspective, it's very important that you have in your lab a mix of new devices, old devices, and also trending devices, just to be able to cover the entire demographics for a target market. So how do I calculate and recommend test coverage? I've, as mentioned, done a lot of research in the market and looked at a lot of analytics report, also from our customers and from research firms that I'm working with, such as IHS. And what we have seen is that in an average market, the top 32 devices, it's not the most accurate science. It can be sometimes, a bit less, a bit more, depending on the geography. In China, by the way, you will find so many brands. So you might see in order to get like 100% usage coverage or 80% usage coverage, you might see a bit more than 32. In the US, you might see a bit less than 32, but that's the rough average number of devices. And out of so many, 10,000s of devices, that's not a big number to have constantly in your lab to get proper market coverage. So the top 10 devices, I would say there is nothing less than 10 devices to really get a basic coverage of your market. And when you look at three iOS different families, right? You have today iOS 9, iOS 10, iOS 11 that is already in a beta or a developer preview. You also have 3 to 4 Android operating system families that you need to deal with, right? I only said 7 to 8 OS versions, different versions, without even talking about the different device vendors. So if I'm able to give you the top 10 device OS permutations, and I'm complementing it, with additional permutations, I think that that's the bare minimum to really get right coverage. And I'm also when I'm talking about permutations, as you see here, I'm talking about latest OS, the previous operating system. Not everyone updates immediately as the operating system is being released, and also public betas. That's also important. So the combination of 10 essential devices and the 15 enhanced coverage devices and the long tail of extended, that's the buckets that I'm developing based on market research to guide the market which devices to test on. And you will find different I would say sets of devices in each bucket. In the extended, by the way, you will see mostly trending devices that are only just introduced to the market. I can give an example. S8, Samsung S8 is very new. So from a usage perspective, you will not see it in almost any analytics report because it was just introduced. However, no one will argue that that's a very important device to already start getting experience with, because compared to the S7 from Samsung, that's a new screen size and resolution. It runs on Android 7 from the beginning. It was developed and launched to the market with Android 7 embedded. So there are many advantages and benefits to actually already start testing on this device and get experience with your application. From a different, or from an opposite place, in the extended, you also see legacy devices. In many markets, we see today devices such as Samsung S3, which is like 5 years ago, 6 almost years ago. You'll find iPhones like iPhone 4, iPhone 4S. These are very old devices, but still they're very highly used. So if you do have customers that are still showing up in your analytics report using these devices, or if you do want to see that your application is still working on legacy, permutations, the extended list might include, will include these kind of devices. In addition to the previous model, I'm not just looking at research firms and analytics and the cloud. I'm also looking, at the vendors themselves. Okay, what is Google and what is Apple saying to the market? So Google, if you look at the Android dashboard, Android OS dashboard, you will see a mess. You will see that Android 7.0 is almost 10% of the market already. And you see that Android 6.0, it's a third of the market. However, you also see I'd say the long tail of operating systems, and there are plenty of very popular devices still running Lollipop, might be even stuck on Lollipop forever. But due to the fact that they are popular, you need to test on them. That's the pain or the chicken and egg. They're not getting the upgrade, but they're still very heavily used. You need to include them in your lab. For iOS, people will say it's easier because 86% of the users are on iOS 10. That's not exactly correct. I will tell you why. Because iOS 10 that has 11% of the market, actually you cannot really avoid testing on that because it's locked with iPhone 4S, iPad mini, and iPad 2. These are three most popular devices in iOS landscape that you simply cannot neglect from testing perspective. So Apple already creates and creating even further a fragmented market, and with iOS 11 you're actually going to see three OS families with three device families that you need to support if you have an iOS application, and the majority of mobile developers are not satisfying with Android. They have both Android and iOS. So iOS is not a picnic. I will soon explain in details what I mean by the iOS fragmentation. As part of the, I would say, the coverage methodology and this magazine that is also free, I mentioned it earlier, I'm providing some insights together with my partners that I work with. So it's not just about a list of devices to test on or a list of browsers to test on. It's also some insights for testers, what they need to take into account. Even though you'll find it almost on the, I think on the last 3 editions of the index report, this insight about beta OS versions, I'm always surprised that I'm going to customers and they are still, not getting the importance of beta testing in the mobile landscape. And it's not just mobile, it's also web, but for mobile, it's even more critical. Since iOS 9, every public beta release of iOS, goes to all the supported devices. So me as a user of Bank of America, when iOS 10 is releasing a beta, a public beta, I have the full rights to download the public beta. It's not jailbroken. It's like any iOS release in the market. So if a vendor that releases an app does not take into consideration as part of his test coverage these beta versions that are publicly available to his customers, is not just causing frustration on the end users that are fast to adopt these platforms, but is also creating a risk because the beta versions are not just from a public beta perspective a window to innovate and provide more insights to his customers. It's also an opportunity to find issues in his current application versions. Apple are not just fixing bugs from beta to beta; they're also doing some other changes, either in the performance, in the some capabilities that are simply now enabling to their users. So being able to get insights from a beta perspective on how your application looks, behave, perform is like a bonus for testers and developers prior to the main GA that is being released, a month or a month and a half later. So please, as a recommendation, take advantage. I'm finding plenty of issues and bugs and regressions when I'm dealing with beta versions on iOS, on Android, and also on desktop browsers such as Chrome 59. I'm highlighting the Chrome 59 latest edition because it actually made a lot of UI changes and it's currently in beta. So that's another opportunity for those of you who have responsive web. Make sure that you download Chrome 59 beta and see how it looks like. You might be surprised. Android fragmentation goes without saying. The Google and Pixel devices are very important. You get both the Android 7.1.2 that is only available on Nexus and Pixels, but you also have the access to the second developer preview of Android O. It's just few months ahead. You need to be on top of the latest operating system from Google before all the Samsungs and the others are catching up, and make sure that your application again works fine. Samsung, it's not a surprise here, but if you don't have all the different leading Samsung devices in your lab, you probably are not listening to what the market has to say. Samsung is globally the most leading vendor in the market, and it's not just from a device perspective, it's also from a feature and innovative perspective. They are leading the AI functionality and features. So if your app strives to provide innovative capabilities around AI and voice-based capabilities, these will be the first platforms for you to start playing with and target as your lead or reference devices from an application development perspective. So Samsung, is still, even though they had these issues with the Note 7, is with no doubt the main Android platform in the market. Google is trying to challenge Samsung with Pixel, and seeing some nice trends over the last few months, but still, it's Samsung and the rest of the world, if you like. A note about what I mentioned earlier about the iOS families. So just to make, to provide you the exact details, starting, it's not September 2017, it's actually starting today, when iOS 11 is already available as a beta for developers. You have these different sets of permutations. iOS 9.3.5, iPad mini, iPad 2, iPad 4S, iPhone 4S. These are three platforms that are very popular around the world, and they are only stuck on iOS 9.3.5. You need to have at least one of these combinations in your lab. The majority and the remaining of the market is running on iOS 10.x, 10.3.2 is the latest one, but iPhone 5, iPhone 5C, and iPad 4th generation, also very popular devices, even though they're legacy, are getting blocked at iOS 10. They will not get an upgrade to iOS 11, meaning that in September, you have iOS 9.3.5 with these three devices, iOS 10 with these three devices or platforms, and the remaining of devices will need to be tested again with iOS 11, making this lab a bit more complex from a device perspective, but not just from a device perspective, also from a test automation perspective. Because if today you have an Appium test code that runs on, I don't know, on iOS 10 only, or on iOS 10 and 9, you suddenly need to have, with all the UI changes coming into iOS 11 and all the other features, you need to have the fine tuning in place to make your script run on three different operating system families and devices with different hardwares, different screen sizes and resolution. So I would say risk ahead. And if you can access today the latest beta of iOS 11, I would actually grab it ASAP and see what the impact on my test automation stability and how my app look today, so I can actually do the changes in advance prior to the GA happening in September. A small commercial, in Perfecto, we already grabbed the iOS 11 developer preview, and we are allowing customers to access this beta on few selected iPhones, real devices. So if you do have this challenge today, Perfecto can definitely help in these regards. Another planning tool around test coverage is a calendar. You can either use this calendar that is on my screen. I'm developing it and I'm putting it as part of my magazine, this Factors Index magazine. You can develop it on your own based on market research that you are doing or your own analytics. But I think that as a fundamental resource for your mobile application testing strategy, you need to have some kind of a calendar that foresees what's going to happen in the next couple of months from device release perspective, from iOS and Android OS release perspective. I'm also taking it a step further, and I'm projecting based on research done over the past few years, when will be the tipping point of the latest Android release. And Android 7, just so you know, in January 2017 was only 2% market share. I projected that by May-June timeframe it will be 15% already. I was a bit wrong because it's just on 10.5 or so percent, but you see a boost happening year over year between January and May, because this is the time frame where all the Samsungs and the LGs are getting finally the update from the previous Android version to the next Android version, that up until that time frame is only available for Google Nexus devices or Pixel. An additional insight that I'm also providing is, like quality and coverage are a moment in time, your lab size is also right in a moment in time. The innovation, the release frequency of new devices and operating systems is by far greater than your end of lifing process of devices that you support. So you see much more new iPhone releases in the market. Let's say in this September, upcoming September, you'll see iPhone 8 and iPhone 8 Plus. You might, choose to include them in your lab, but iPhone 4 and iPhone 4S are still, in the market. iPhone 5 is still relevant in the market. So there is a bit of an edge or advantage of devices that are being introduced compared to the one that you are taking out of your lab. And there are some statistics here that you see that year over year, between 2 and 3 devices added to your test lab in order to maintain the similar coverage that you had last year. So let's say you want to have 30% coverage in 2017. In 2017, 13 devices might be sufficient for you. In 2018, you'll go to 16 devices just to have a mobile test lab. Don't count on what you have right now in the lab from a number of devices to be the right number also next year, because things changes, unfortunately. A word about web coverage, because again, you might be developing a mobile web app. You might be developing a responsive web app that runs on both mobile devices as well as desktop browsers. And this is why it's important to also be familiar with web coverage. As part of my methodology and research, and again, everything here and in the mobile session that I just finished, you need to back it up with your own analytics. So if your marketing, your business gets analytics through Google, through Adobe, through other analytics firm or tool, some other companies will actually install on the devices a real user monitoring agent that reports back to their dashboard. So they will also have insights which devices are hitting their backend, and also be able to know on which devices to focus more. From a web perspective, Chrome, Firefox, IE, Safari, Edge, these are the top 5 browsers globally. When we'll drill down into specific geographies, you might see some surprising insights, and I will soon show you what I mean. But from a Chrome perspective, my recommendation is to always go with the current, the previous, and the beta as the bare minimum against these operating system permutations: Windows 7, 8, Windows 10, Mac OS, El Capitan, and Sierra. And last week or 2 weeks ago in Worldwide Development Conference, the new Sierra OS was released. So once it's being released to the market, you need to also include the new Mac OS with Chrome as part of your test lab. And every month you will see a new Chrome beta or Chrome GA being released. Same goes for Firefox. IE is stuck on iOS 11. You won't see that many things happening in the IE because everything is now on Edge. But also from both IE and Edge perspective, Microsoft is very, very slow to upgrade. So I think that from a stability perspective in your web test coverage, you wouldn't need to worry that much about these permutations. You probably have to set up your grid, Selenium grid or cloud-based web lab that covers IE 11, 8, and 9 together with Edge 14. And it will probably be good for the next couple of months because there are no major movements. Safari, from Safari perspective, Safari is running on at least the 2 latest families, macOS Sierra and El Capitan, but the new Sierra was also introduced, so you might see a bit of a small size increase in your lab for web testing as well. Sorry. So from a web test coverage perspective, compared to analytics, that's the basic test coverage that I'm recommending. And just so you know, your end users don't know and they don't care about which version their Chrome is running or their Firefox is running. They care that it works. So when they close the Chrome browser, they open it again, it most likely automatically upgrade them to the latest or the current version. So you need to take advantage again on take advantage for the beta. I mentioned in a previous slide that Chrome 59 is in beta. Make sure that you get access to this beta and see before your end users are upgrading or automatically being upgraded, you see how it looks like on your responsive website or your mobile web or website as well. So that's a basic landscape of current, previous beta on the different permutations that I'm recommending. If you have different analytics, I will match them. And desktop browsers in the previous slide, but if you look from a global geo perspective and in Europe, you might see some different adoption rates. In Europe, you will see that Opera browser, which wasn't in the previous slide, accounts for 6% of the market. Samsung Internet, 7%. UC browser, I don't know how many of you online have ever heard about UC browser. It's backed up by Alibaba. That's the vendor behind this browser. Honestly, I'm not an expert in this browser, but the numbers show, and I have the charts here in the links that you can go to Start Counter and read more. But these browsers, if you are operating in Europe or even in China or globally, you might want to do a small sanity check also on these browser permutations, because apparently they have quite significant usage or user base. Lastly, as I showed in the previous mobile calendar, there is also another recommendation to have a web calendar as a planning tool for your test coverage. And this is not science fiction. You can go to the Chrome project website and to the Mozilla website, and you will find the schedule for the entire release train up until the end of the year. So I did the messy work. I collected all the schedule milestone from both Google and Mozilla for the Chrome and Firefox. And what you can see here that, again, as I mentioned, almost every month there is a new either public beta or GA of one of these browsers. So, you cannot stand still. You need to have a dynamic Selenium grid that can enable this refresh rate and provide you the insight on the new browsers, so you find the issues as fast as possible. You have vendors, again, like Perfecto, that have both mobile and web browsers in the cloud that supports all the latest permutations, including betas, that can help you. You can go to other cloud vendors. You can do it yourself through Amazon. Again, it's a lot of maintenance and IT work to enable all of these upgrades, but that's the reality. The mobile and web market are not slowing down. They're changing almost every month with innovative features, with new versions, new devices. And if you are in this business, you need to be on top of your market coverage and make sure that all the test coverage that was talked about in the previous session actually runs on all of these platforms in parallel and provides the right insights. With that slide, hopefully I didn't bore everyone to death. I'm done. Joel, that was my last slide, and I hope you take it.
I'll take it from here. So, Eran, first of all, thank you very much for the session. I think that one of the biggest takeaways that I take from here is the fact that you guys and a lot of people in the industry are already doing all the homework. And I remember back in the day, even trying to figure out what should we test, when should we test it, stuff like that was a headache. And having a service that actually tells you, hey, not only is this what you have outside, this is what's coming up, then it's great. So thank you very much. I see a lot of people who are interested in understanding how to get those slides, I guess, in order to get all that information. So those are actually great assets. There are a couple of additional questions, but I think that due to lack of time, I didn't want to interrupt you. We're actually speaking about all that of web as well, and not only about the mobile. So I didn't want to interrupt. So I think that we will take it over to Slack. So guys, just a couple of reminders. First of all, thanks to Eran. We have Slack channels for everyone, and we're also going to be sharing on those Slack channels the feedback forms. And again, continue those conversations over in Slack. Also, continue sending us your pictures on the MIA at TLC Slack channel. Those are pretty cool. And we'll be back in about 15 minutes with the next presentation by Matt Heuser as well as Chris Kenst. A great, again, basically a topic that blew me away when I saw it, and that is about contributing to GitHub is actually for everyone. So guys, go on a break. We have 15 minutes, and then we'll get started with the next session. Thank you very much, Eran. Thank you very much. And again, we'll talk soon enough. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.